Thank you for joining us today. My name is Frank Valdivieso, and I'm the President and CEO of Gryphon Consulting. I want to thank everyone to be here. All right. Well, one of the things I want to basically start off by saying is I'm so thankful that all of you are here today. I think one of the things that I love about serving this community, and this is something that Luis says, he's one of my team members, is that, you know, when everyone says that the world is kind of burning up, it's a real joy to be working with organizations, nonprofits that are really trying to make a difference. So I'd say for all of you that are on the line here that are supporting nonprofits, and basically give yourselves a real round of applause and a pat on the back for all the good that you're doing out there in society today. So before we get started with our content, I just want to give you a little bit of background on who we are as an organization. Again, we're an IT services partner focused on providing managed services to both commercial entities and nonprofits. We've got a number of areas that we focus on, primarily modern work, which basically translates into Copilot, Microsoft 365, Exchange, SharePoint, and those technologies. The other thing is we've got a phenomenal team, and actually you're going to meet, I'll kind of give an overview and introduction of a couple of my team members. And later on today, I'm going to have one of our team members join us and talk about some of the strengths and capabilities of Copilot from a security perspective. As an organization, the other thing that we're kind of focused on is, again, being a trusted advisor to organizations like yourself. As a small company, we also have developed and relationships with a couple of trade associations, the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners and the Black Channel Partner Alliance. These are organizations that we kind of tap into should there be a situation where we need to bring additional technical resources in to help solve a problem. We'll go ahead and reach out to this vast network of resources to bring to bear. The other thing I want to bring up is as we go through today's presentation, there's an opportunity where you might feel a little exasperated in terms of where can I get help? One of the things that we do have an offer available, which is a workshop where we can come in and work with your organization specifically to help you get set up and develop an implementation plan for Copilot. Basically, there are three parts to this engagement, where we'll come in and assess your environment, identify any specific outcomes that you like to achieve, and then showcase how Copilot could potentially be used in your organization to solve specific problems. And then lastly, what we'll do is we'll work with you to complete and develop an implementation plan for your organization. Just real briefly, just some of the nonprofits that we work with kind of vary, I'd say, from small startup organizations such as Vivian Door, which is a born in the cloud organization that got started in COVID, to organizations like Rice, the Russell Center in Atlanta, providing a whole host of services to these organizations. And with me today on the call, I've got a couple members of my team, Rodney Hawkins, who's our business development executive, and Luis Valdivieso, who's kind of behind the scenes here, making sure that everything is working great with this webinar, and he's my chief/officer. All right, so let's jump into the meat of the presentation. So before we get started, I'd like to start with some basics about AI-powered solutions that we're going to be exploring today. And I'd say that some of the most exciting advancements in AI are coming out of LLM, or large language models, and generative AI. And what I like to do is, if we're looking at Copilot as a platform, Copilot for Microsoft 365 isn't just a better way of doing the same things. It's an entirely new way of working. And when you look at it, for all the value that Copilot brings to individual users in their broader organization, the architecture itself is fundamentally simple, right? It's an orchestrator, and with the large language model, say that 3 times real fast, built on top of your existing Microsoft 365 solutions. And all of this takes place within the compliance boundary. That means that Copilot combines the power of cutting-edge LLMs with your specific content in Microsoft Graph, which is essentially your documents, your emails, your calendars, and chats. And then you combine that with the ability to use this technology within the applications that you know and love to really extend the power and extensibility of those platforms. And then finally, it can also tap into the web and bring in content from the web as well. And again, Copilot is basically tying all of these platforms together. So here I'm going to play just a brief video giving a brief overview of Copilot.
Microsoft 365 Copilot is powered by what we call the Copilot system, a sophisticated processing and orchestration engine. It harnesses the power of three foundational technologies: the Microsoft 365 apps, that's Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, and more. The Microsoft Graph, that's all your content and context, your emails, files, meetings, chats, and calendar. And a large language model, or LLM, a creative engine capable of parsing and producing human-readable text, all accessible through natural language. It starts with a prompt from you in an app. Copilot pre-processes the prompt through an approach called grounding. Put simply, grounding improves the quality of the prompt, so you get answers that are relevant and actionable. One of the most important parts of grounding is making a call to the Microsoft Graph to retrieve your business content and context. Copilot combines this user data from the graph with other inputs to improve the prompt. It then sends that modified prompt to the LLM. You may be familiar with what an LLM can do based on your experience with ChatGPT or Bing Chat. Copilot takes the response from the LLM and post-processes it. This post-processing includes additional grounding calls to the graph, responsible AI checks, security, compliance, and privacy reviews, and command generation. Finally, Copilot sends a response to the user and commands back to the apps. Copilot iteratively processes and orchestrates these sophisticated services to produce a result that feels like magic. Microsoft 3.
All right. So one of the distinctions I want to make for those of you on the call that are just getting into this, just getting into Copilot, is a distinction that I want to make. There are actually two platforms, if you will. There's Copilot, which you've probably used in different forms, may or may not have used Copilot in Bing. And then there's Copilot for Microsoft 365. So Copilot in Bing basically just works with your current web data, where you can go ahead and create prompts and get back data from the larger internet, if you will. However, Copilot from Microsoft 365 essentially focuses on your data within the organization. So let me give you a couple examples here to kind of illustrate this. So Copilot, which is always grounded in web data, you can use it to ask larger questions. And so one of the articles that I always love to send to individuals when they're trying to ask me questions about AI and the power of it is this wonderful blog by Dr. Lisa, where she gives 10 frameworks for how you can use ChatGPT for basically asking strategy-driven questions, if you will. So for example, you can do a SWOT analysis of your organization. And again, I implore you, if you guys have a few minutes, you can go ahead and copy and paste this particular prompt into your Bing chat and go ahead and have it do an analysis of your organization. It's amazing the content it'll provide you, the feedback that you get. Or you might want to compare two products. And then, or lastly, again, use the web to basically conduct an in-depth analysis of your industry. And again, this is great, not just for nonprofits, but for commercial entities. As a matter of fact, we use it for competitive analysis as well. We'll do a SWOT analysis on our competition to kind of understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of our competition. Again, just an amazing tool to use. The other thing is Copilot from Microsoft 365. Obviously, now this is where these things are grounded in your work data. So one of my favorite questions to ask is, please summarize all of the action items for all of the emails that I've got in today. Again, probably like a lot of you, were inundated with email messages, or summarize team messages from this week. As a matter of fact, one of our clients, what they're looking to do right now with Copilot is they currently provide consulting services for individuals. So they provide business consulting services, but those consulting services are provided by consultants that are located all throughout the country. And the way they currently are doing this is they've got actually an administrative person that sits in the meeting that has to basically physically is responsible for capturing all of the action items and promises that are made. Well, they're deploying Copilot in Teams so that they can free up that resource, and then they can just come back and get that summary. Again, we're estimating that they'll probably recoup anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 next year that they'll be able to redeploy within the organization for other resources, for other purposes within the organization. So, how do we prepare nonprofit organizations for Copilot, or any organization for Copilot? When we look at bringing Copilot into the organization, obviously, this is really a new way of working that involves both software and culture. And some of the common problem or questions that we hear from customers over and over again when it comes down to deploying Copilot is, things around who do I first give the seats to? How do I get employees up and running quickly? And what are the ways to measure impact? And one of the exciting things I know, just several months ago, this was a really daunting, question, really daunting in terms of how do I deploy it? The biggest question and concerns that we would get from organizations really surrounded the security of the data in the organization. Common use case or question we get: I don't want my line employees to be able to query, what's Frank's salary? How much is he bringing down? And so not providing employees with access to data that they shouldn't have. And so we'll address that. There's some really exciting things that have taken place that are really going to help organizations fast track the implementation of Copilot in their organizations. So when we look at the process, there's essentially 3 phases as we look at this. And again, here at Gryphon Consulting, if you don't have the resources internally, this is where we can help. And there's been a couple ways that we've worked with organizations in terms of helping them do this. So for those organizations that already have IT staff, you've got the CIO, Chief Technology Officer. Well, what we can do is augment that your existing staff. And so those internal resources can be leveraged to focus on the implementation of Copilot, whereas Gryphon can come in, augment that team, and also we can provide support services to kind of take up the slack in the day-to-day operations that potentially your internal staff won't be able to cover while they are deploying Copilot. So first phase is all about readiness. Again, we definitely recommend that you kind of pick a pilot project. And specifically for nonprofits, we're going to talk about a real specific use case that we see over and over again that I think would be amazing, which has a lot of value. And that's around writing grants and responding to grants. I think there's an amazing use case for Copilot in that, and we'll cover that later within the presentation. So readiness is about, understanding, where are you going to start, picking a pilot project, because you want to get some wins on the board with regard to deploying Copilot, and creating an AI council or a center of excellence around AI within the organization, a multidiscipline group that you want to pull together. Then there's the adoption phase, if you will, and here where you're creating your user community, you're identifying your champions and adopters, and you're having some success and implementing some best practices, if you will. And then obviously the third phase is measuring the impact and success of that, of your implementation so far. All right. The other thing that you want to look at, and there are some minimum technical requirements that you need to make sure that you have within the organization. And again, this really extends beyond just nonprofits, but also for-profit organizations. You want to make sure that you're on the right versions of Microsoft 365. You've got to either have Business Standard, Premium, obviously E3 or E5. I know for our clients where we've been highly recommending E5 only because of the tremendous value that's available in that SKU in terms of not just basic requirements, but security capabilities in that SKU as well. You've got to have Entra-ID accounts established as well, and you want to require users to have a OneDrive account. Now, this is especially important for some of the things that we're going to talk about later on down the line in terms of a strategy for fast tracking the deployment of Copilot within your organization. The other thing is in terms of Outlook, you've got to basically be using Outlook for Windows. This for me was probably the hardest one. I'm such a hardcore user of the desktop version of Outlook, but I'm getting over it and able to use Outlook for Windows just fine. Actually, I have both of them running in my environment. So whenever I want to summarize emails, I'm using Outlook in Windows. And then obviously you have to have the newest version of Teams deployed as well. So one of the things here, again, and what I'm going to show you next is, here are some basic things that you can try in terms of some foundational skills that you can deploy right away with Copilot. And I think the message I want you guys to leave here today is that I believe that there are a number of things that we're going to talk about here to reduce the risk, if you will, and the fear associated with deploying Copilot in your environments because of the immense security infrastructure that's in place that Microsoft already has in place in terms of protecting your data, the fact that your data is not being used to train any LLMs outside of the environment. So there's a lot of benefits associated with your organization getting up and running. So I guess the bottom line is that I don't see any reason that any organization on this call today isn't deploying Copilot right away. So again, some of the features here and some of the prompts you can see here, I won't read each of these, but definitely the ability to recap a meeting. And again, when you look at the productivity gains that your staff will get, the creativity gains that are gained as well, it's just amazing in terms of the value that this technology is bringing into the organization. And again, the ability to leverage your corporate information as well. The capabilities are endless in terms of what you'll be able to do with this technology and Copilot in your organizations. All right, so a couple of other things from a checklist perspective. And again, for those of you on the line, we will be sending a copy of all the slides out to everyone that's attended or registered. But here are some basic things in terms of activities that you'll want to go ahead and get in place. Obviously, I talked a little bit about this, is identifying your early adopter teams in terms of piloting the product and getting feedback. Obviously, launching a limited pilot. And again, I'm going to give you a specific use case that you could leave here today and implement within your organizations, I think, tomorrow. Obviously, you want to monitor usage and gather feedback to improve the user training and user experience as you're going on this journey. And obviously, one of the things that early on was a challenge, and I think this is changing dramatically. And actually, I'm going to bring up one of our team members here next to kind of talk about some of the security implications. Was we now have a way, or will have a way here very shortly, to deploy Copilot in your organization and be able to take advantage of all of the capabilities as you build out the more robust security constraints and features that need to be deployed in an organization. So you'll be able to get to market quicker with deploying Copilot in your organizations. So let's talk about some of the zero trust principles and data security for Copilot for Microsoft 365.
Microsoft 365 Copilot is transforming work with the power of generative AI. It's built on Microsoft's comprehensive approach to enterprise-grade security, compliance, privacy, identity, and responsible AI. Copilot automatically inherits your organization's Microsoft 365 security, compliance, and privacy policies, so you know your data is protected and always in your control. It all starts with your Microsoft 365 tenant. Data stored in your tenant is encrypted and only available to the users within that tenant. Your existing Microsoft 365 permissions and policies ensure the data won't leak between users and groups. And Copilot users only have access to data they've been granted permission to see in Microsoft 365 using the same technology customers have relied on for years. Your tenant sits inside the Microsoft 365 service boundary, where Microsoft's commitments to security, compliance, data location, and privacy are upheld. The Copilot large language models, or LLMs, that process your data sit within that same boundary, much like other Microsoft 365 services. Microsoft does not have eyes-on access, which means no one can view your data. Your data is not used to train the LLMs. And our EU customers can be confident that their data is processed within the EU data boundary. Microsoft 365 Copilot, enterprise-grade security and privacy for the era of generative AI.
All right, I'd like to bring up Nick Blackman to the stage to kind of give us, do a little bit deeper dive on the security controls in Copilot. Nick, are you with us?
I'm with you, Frank. Can you hear me out there?
I can hear you just fine, Nick.
All right. Well, thank you, Frank, for bringing me on. I just want to take a pause and just introduce myself to everyone. My name is Nick Blackman. I'm an architect with the Partner Masters, and I actually work with partners to help them to build solutions for their customers. I'm a good friend of Gryphon Consultant, a good friend of Frank's, and so I'm really happy to be here. I have about 20 years of experience in IT working across the entire Microsoft stack. I worked formerly for Microsoft's U.S. Global Partner Solutions team with their modern work and security teams therein. So today we want to talk to you about this feature and to kind of help you to see how restricted SharePoint search within Copilot can help your organization to jumpstart your Copilot deployment. Well, let's take a moment and let's unpack this. The first thing is that restricted SharePoint search allows you to disable organization-wide and also to restrict both enterprise search as well as the Copilot experiences to a curated set of SharePoint sites. Now let's think about that. Copilot for Microsoft 365 is going to allow the user to query and to search any information that user may have access to. So let's say, for instance, you haven't had the opportunity yet to go through your file permissions within SharePoint. You haven't had the opportunity to set those restrictions, to set those boundaries, those least privilege controls, those zero trust principles, in implementing those boundaries to prevent users from seeing information that they should not have access to. I want to give you another scenario. Think about it this way. What if you had a user who is attempting to see the CEO's salary information? Now, we actually heard Frank use that same illustration earlier. You have a user that's out there trying to see the CEO's salary information. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. If that user has read privileges to that data, and if you have that information potentially stored in one of the SharePoint libraries that you have yet to restrict, that user would be able to utilize Copilot to retrieve said information. Copilot is going to show the user all information that they have explicit read privileges to. So with this specific feature set, this is going to help a customer organization such as yourself to get jump-started. Whereas instead of having to go through the process of implementing sensitivity labels right away or implementing the information governance controls right away, we still recommend that you do that, but you won't have to have the same amount of urgency because this feature set allows you to then, again, restrict those SharePoint sites and restrict the level of access that a user would have. Now, let's unpack this for a second. And Frank, I know you're really excited about this feature set just as I am. But one thing that this feature set does is that when you turn this on, this restricted SharePoint search is set to off by default. But when you enable this, Copilot users and non-Copilot users will only be able to find content from an allowed list of curated SharePoint sites. Okay, so put simply, only what you specify that you want users to be able to search from. Anything that's private or confidential, you can definitely have that restricted. Now, along with that, these users would also have access to content from their frequently visited SharePoint sites, also from users' OneDrives, chats, and emails that specific user has access to. So they won't be able to access the OneDrives or information within the OneDrive using Copilot from a user that they may not have been granted access to. But if someone has shared a file with them in OneDrive and they want to use Copilot to search for any relevant content related to that file or related to that topic, they'll be able to do so. This also applies to any files that were shared directly with the user or files that might have been created or edited by the user. Now, Frank, I know that you at Gryphon Consulting, you guys are helping customers to prepare their organizations for implementing Copilot. Can you tell me, how do you feel about this feature set? Are you as excited as I am?
Yeah, there's no doubt. And so, one of the biggest challenges that we see that this addresses is the reduction in terms of the cost associated with deploying a Copilot within an organization, right? So that kind of significantly reduces the cost for getting Copilot within the organization. And that way, organizations can start taking advantage of all of the productivity and creativity advantages of Copilot much quicker. So especially around, for nonprofits, grant writing, constituent engagement, and the like. And so like the example I gave of the one client that we're working with that is essentially going to use it just for removing the requirement of having a physical person there to actually take notes in team meetings. They're now freeing it up, and like I said, they're going to see the gain anywhere between $20,000 to $30,000 that they're going to be able to redeploy within the organization. So this is a game changer, I think, for a lot of the organizations that we're working with in terms of being able to get them jump started right away, if you will, with this feature. And again, this really is intended to be a temporary solution. Again, as part of what we can do for you and help you with is to kind of develop that roadmap and implementation plan to go ahead and develop, your full a security solution built around Purview and content management, and then doing some advanced management with your SharePoint content as well.
Excellent. Totally agree with that, Frank. So with that being said, let's move forward. Let's tell our group here about some of these other great things that you can do with Microsoft Security Stack to protect your data. So I want to speak to this slide here just for a moment. Microsoft 365 security and compliance controls that can be specifically used for Copilot. Now let's unpack this for a second. So as you notice, we have kind of a good, better, and best approach. We start off with our baseline security. Now, what exactly is that? As you can see here under the license of Office 365 E5, you have that ability to implement multi-factor authentication with security defaults. Okay, so this is going to be the basic policy sets that exist with multi-factor authentication for your users, for your user identities. This falls under E3. Now, I want you to pause for a second. I know you probably are thinking this. You're probably saying to yourself, why do I need to have multi-factor authentication set up just so that I can use Copilot? Well, let's think about this. One of the requirements to utilize Copilot for Microsoft 365 was for the user identity to exist within Microsoft Entra. Let's think about that. Microsoft Entra ID is the new name for Azure Active Directory. That means that user identity needs to be either hybrid synchronized to the cloud, or fully in the cloud. So either hybrid synced or cloud only. Now think of it this way. What if a threat actor has gained the opportunity to compromise one of your identities? Let's say, for instance, they have compromised Frank's account. Frank has a great level of privilege. Frank has access to Copilot. Well, if Frank does not have multi-factor authentication on his account, that user will be able to access all the information that Frank is already privileged to. So this is one of the reasons why you want to have multi-factor authentication assigned to your users by default. Now, moving on here, when we look at sensitivity labels, you might be saying to yourself, why do I need to have sensitivity labels implemented with my organization just to use Copilot? Well, I'm going to take a pause here, and I'm going to say to you a very important statement. A sensitivity label can make or break you as an organization. Let me really explain what I mean by that. If you do not have sensitivity labels deployed within your environment, this could put your organization at risk for a breach. Now, why do I say that? Put it to you this way. If someone has sensitive information in your environment and they attempt to exfiltrate that data externally and share that data with someone that should not have access to that data, once that data is exfiltrated, that user has the ability to then open that data, see what's in it, and potentially now your organization has been breached because information has been leaked out. Well, the way that Microsoft utilizes sensitivity labels, specifically with Microsoft Purview Information Governance, is that you have the ability to set encryption on all of your files. So even if someone tries internally to see some content, some data that they're not authorized to see because they're not authorized to see the sensitive information, they're going to see nothing but a black screen if they try to open that document. They're going to be told that they're not authorized to see these contents due to the fact that this is sensitive information. If that information somehow, some way gets shared externally, the same thing happens. When a threat actor or someone who's attempting to steal this information tries to open that file, again, the encryption watermark basically only shows them a black screen, and thus your organization has been spared from a potential breach. Now, this is important because with using Copilot from Microsoft 365, keep in mind that original statement that I made a few minutes ago. Copilot will show you everything that you have explicit read permissions to. So if there is sensitive data, personal identifiable information, salary data, things of those sorts, it's important to utilize Microsoft 365 groups to basically define who should have access to this sensitive data, and then accompany that with the use of sensitivity labels to ensure that only authorized users will be able to see this data, whether by opening the file or using Copilot to query the information. Now, just to move along here so we won't get short on time, as you see here, as you go up here within the stack, you see at the core security controls, still using a Microsoft 365 E3 license. It gets a little better with the Microsoft 365 E3 license because there's more features within that specific license. Let's talk about it. Specifically, you have conditional access. The data is everywhere. The users are everywhere now. Gone are the days when the users only existed behind the corporate firewall. Users are not necessarily working in the office as they were prior to the pandemic. So you have to be able to protect the data both at transit as well as the data at rest. You want to ensure that users are only accessing the data from devices that you approve of, devices that have the appropriate policy sets so that the data cannot be exfiltrated or misused. The same thing applies, again, to manual sensitivity labels for non-Microsoft products. What about those PDF documents? What about those other file types that's not necessarily an app that exists within the Microsoft 365 Enterprise app? You have to be able to protect that data as well, and thus utilize the available policy sets for manual sensitivity labels with that also. Also think about this, endpoint management capabilities. We're talking about Copilot from Microsoft 365. I want you to ask yourself, where are you running Copilot from Microsoft 365? You might be using a browser. Again, that browser resides on an endpoint. It resides on the desktop. So you want to be using those conditional access policies, again, to protect that endpoint as well. Now, as we get to the best in class, of course, it's going to get much better. But I just want to say just these two things before we move to our next slide. You want to incorporate things such as user risk and session controls. That's another advanced aspect of conditional access policies. This gets deeper to ensure that threat actors can exploit any openings. We also want to look for the automatic applying of sensitivity labels. So let's think about this. We have our great partners here at Gryphon Consulting, who can help you to implement these workloads, to help you to set up automatic sensitivity labels, to help you to have these things designed by policy so that you don't have to manually touch and look for sensitive info types in your organization. These things can be automatically detected by the algorithms created by Microsoft's tools, and our partners at Gryphon Consulting can help you to do that. In addition to that, there's also the ability to discover and evaluate cloud apps. Now, what am I talking about here? I'm talking about Microsoft's Cloud Access Security Broker. That's Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. It can help to detect the use of shadow IT in your environment, as well as the use of non-authorized AI apps. These are apps that are going to potentially use your corporate information. You want to ensure that there's not any users in your org that are using these unauthorized apps and thus exfiltrating your data. These are all things to keep in mind. So with that being said, those are some of the things that we can do to help to protect that data. Frank, if you don't mind, let's move forward to our next slide.
All right, sounds good. And we got some questions here. We'll get to after the presentation here. We'll circle back on some of these questions.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
Go
Frank,
ahead. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So let's kind of talk about this. If you notice what it shows here at the slide, it says prepare your data for searches and Copilot for Microsoft 365. Again, I know what you're thinking. Why do I have to prepare the data? Let's think about that. Now, if you have an organization to where you have been keeping track of your data, you've been retiring data after a certain amount of years, you've been applying sensitivity labels and information governance principles and zero trust principles thereout, then you are in a healthy state to get started with using Copilot for Microsoft 365. But let's just say that you may not have those things in place. Let's say that you have data that might be 10 or more years old. You may not quite know what your sensitive information types are that exist in your environment. You haven't done that analysis, right? You may not even know where all of your data exists. You might have some data that exists within Microsoft 365, as well as some data that's outside of Microsoft 365. The key thing is that you want to get a handle on this data. This is going to help to protect your organization. This is going to lessen your risk posture, right? This is going to help you to secure all of those attack vectors so again, that you can use Copilot for Microsoft 365 responsibly. Now, the first thing is that we want to point out here is that it's imperative to clean out redundant, outdated, and trivial content. We call it ROT, R-O-T. That's exactly how it sounds, right? The reason being is because this is that data that is potentially going to put you at risk. If you have data that has sensitive information on it, that's older than 7 years, older than 10 years, ask yourself, do I need to keep this? And along with that, there are Microsoft tools, specifically Microsoft Purview Records Management, that can help you to, again, evaluate the data that you have in your environment and then curtail this data to ensure that you are securing your data estate properly and using Copilot responsibly along with these data sets. Along with that, we also have some other recommendations to organize your data into logical folders and sites. Tag your data with keywords. That's another thing that we have as a recommendation. You might say to yourself, why is that necessary? Well, with all of the data that we have across all of our workloads, it would be great to be able to quickly identify our data sets. We also can accompany this with policy sets that Copilot for Microsoft 365 utilizes. In addition with the policy sets and tool sets that are part of the privacy side of things with Microsoft Purview, these are all going to work together to help you to ensure that users are only able to access the files and the data that they should have access to. And we're not going to read every single last one of these, but just to kind of point out one other thing. It helps us to see that we should standardize on file names, have that naming convention, have custodians within your organization to help to keep track of the data and to help to keep this data under wraps, right? This is just another way to get a grip on the organization's data and to kind of take it from there. Consolidating multiple versions. If you got multiple versions floating around out there, how do you know what's the source of truth? These are all things that you can do. Now, you might be saying to yourself, you might be feeling overwhelmed with all of these things. The beautiful thing is that Microsoft provides these tools that can help to control all of these things that we just mentioned. We have the Microsoft Purview family of products that has a solution for each one of these things that we just mentioned here. So for instance, let's kind of look into that. Thank you, Frank. You read my mind here. Let's talk about some of it. Well, the first is Microsoft Purview data loss prevention. We want to ensure that that data does not get exfiltrated, that we can protect that data and protect our users' data no matter where they are, right? As long as that data is in Microsoft 365, we have the ability to put the controls upon it. In addition to that, we have another one such as Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Microsoft Purview Information Protection works fully with those sensitivity labels. Sensitivity labels fall into that product family. More specifically, you can apply encryption and rights management, again, to protect that data. There's so many more things here that we can read through. Frank, can I have you go to the next slide here for me?
Yep.
One other thing
and
I
think,
want
I think one of the things here I'd say for those organizations here that have internal IT, you can see definitely want to get your team up to speed on Purview. Purview is a big part of securing your environment in terms of the vast number of capabilities that it has built into that platform. Again, if you don't have the internal staff, that's where we can come in and assist you with this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Frank. Well said. So with that being the case, Frank, one thing that I find that organizations will get a great use out of is also utilizing tool sets like the Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management. So, we talked about that ROT, that redundant, outdated, and trivial data. Utilizing this tool set, Purview, Data Lifecycle Management, along with Purview Records Management, is going to allow you to set those expiration dates on that data. If that data should only reside for 7 years in your organization, you'll have the ability to set a policy set to make sure that that data is retired after a certain amount of time. Of course, with the ability to, retrieve the data if it's accidentally deleted. These are just all the things that can empower an organization to help to get themselves ready and fully protected for, utilizing tool sets such as Copilot from Microsoft 365. Frank, let's go to the next slide. I have one more thought I wanted to kind of share on.
Let's see. So I was going to jump in and start giving them a specific use case that they can leave here today with in terms of implementing Copilot right away in their organizations. One of the things that we see, and this actually applies not just to nonprofits, but for-profit organizations that are really dealing with either for the nonprofit, it's about fundraising and grant writing. Is a challenge, if you will. For-profit organizations, it's proposals, right? RFP responses. And so organizations like yourself, I'm sure you're facing some of these challenges around fundraising and grant writing. How do you retain and engage your donors? And again, what we see is Copilot is an amazing tool that can be applied to this specific use case, if you will. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to briefly take you through a demo of a development associate, Megan here, who works for a Contoso nonprofit. And what she's going to do is she's going to do some research on digital literacy of senior citizens in Washington State. That's basically accessing content in the web. She then is going to go ahead and review and pull up last year's proposal, if you will, and then create a new grant application based on the information that she's gathered, and then share an email with her team to ask them to review the document. So what we see here is we've got Megan essentially starting off with asking a question, generating a prompt, if you will. And Megan, again, is the development associate at Contoso. And she's going to just ask some information within Bing Copilot. She wants some data about digital literacy in Washington State, specifically around seniors 65 years and older. So she basically puts in the prompt, and right away, Copilot comes back with some information. Now, since she needs information outside of Contoso's own data, she's asked Copilot and Bing to find this information, right? And so here you see Copilot has brought back some information for her to review on tech adoption trends, tablet ownership, and internet use for this particular constituent. See? And what she now says is she's asked Bing to basically, Copilot and Bing, to summarize and refine the answers, right? So when she's has this information, she can ask Copilot to refine this response, and she can even change the tone of the response to really meet her needs if she wanted to. She could take this content, copy it, paste it, and make it sound, basically change the tone of this response. All right. So here we see these are just a starting point. These are answers. This is more information. She's now going to go ahead and copy this information, right? Because she's going to use it as part of her new grant proposal. So she switches over basically to her work profile. and asked Copilot to show her a copy of last year's grant proposal. So she wants Copilot to bring up and can it look for content related to last year's proposal. And you can see here that Copilot has found a couple documents within her environment, within her 365 environment. It's identified a PowerPoint and a Word document that it's found. So she can go ahead and click on that Word document to bring it up and take a look at it. And after reviewing it, she determines that, hey, this is a great starting point for my response for the new proposal that I'm going to submit for FY24. So she basically asks Copilot to help her draft a grant proposal referencing the document that it just found. And so she can, she can ask questions such as draft a grant proposal, specify the document. She can now drop in the external data that she found in Copilot and merge it with the new document that has been created. Now, after she's got that one draft created, she can clean up the draft. She can now summarize it. And now she's in Outlook, and she's asking Copilot to basically generate an email, draft an email, asking her team to kind of review and update the proposal for her. And so here we see that Copilot has generated this response. Now she's got a couple options here. She can keep the draft. She can discard it and just write her own message, or she can ask Copilot to regenerate. And again, this is one of the things that I see again, I think with the new SharePoint restriction, the ability for organizations to be able to start leveraging the content that you already have in the organization, I think is a game changer for organizations. So here we've kind of just to summarize what we've seen, and I guess I only have a couple slides there, and then we'll get to Q&A. We'll open that up. Again, we've kind of seen how Megan basically leveraged using Copilot to ask the web to do some research. She found some content, was able to leverage that content in the new grant proposal, and then share and ask her team to review the document. So before I kind of open it up for Q&A, again, I just want to remind everyone, we do have the ability, if you kind of find this overwhelming and you need further support, please reach out to us. We've got this great offer in market where we can come in and do a workshop. And again, we also have the ability to help you locate funds if necessary to help offset the cost for deploying Copilot. So we can work with your organization to help you along those lines. And again, here's my team, our email messages, and I want to thank you for attending.